Good evening, everyone, and it's my great pleasure to it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the lecture to the lecture tonight. And it's an extremely exciting evening, and we're really looking forward to the lecture by Achille Mbembe. So we're doing this kind of event tonight as a first of a series of lectures kind of on issues of climate change. I think it would be fair to say that society is at a precipice, and that the pathway that we've chosen for the last the last 2 centuries for how we want to deal with issues of industrialization, how we want to deal with issues of economic growth, and how we want to deal with issues of societal kind of change, have kind of really generated 2 kind of problems that really confront us head on. So the first, clearly, we have used the natural resources around us kind of in a way that is completely unsustainable. And we've now reached a point where we can't actually go back to save the situation. I think the best that we can do is to adapt and to kind of ensure that through our actions we don't make the problem completely catastrophic. The kind of second dimension of the policies that we've followed for the last 200 years is that we've kind of really generated patterns of inequality, patterns of wealth, patterns of poverty that are simply not sustainable. With those 2 kind of issues in mind, the universities decided to create a pro-vice chancellor's office to deal with these 2 issues and to promote, kind of promote the footprint of the university in kind of really grappling with these issues, and kind of for the university to kind of play its role in kind of analyzing these challenges, but also offering solutions. With that in mind, one of the activities that we're doing is to kind of have a series of lectures, and we could not have started it off better than with one of our most foremost thinkers on kind of on these issues. I'll say a bit more about that, but I want to just highlight the fact that that the Pro-V's office is hosting this lecture series kind of jointly with the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research, and also with the Future Ecosystems for Africa kind of project that is based at this university. With that in mind, let me just call on the 2 heads of those programs to just say a few words of welcome. So I'm going to start with Sarah.
Thanks for the opportunity to co-host. In some ways, you stole our thunder. We were going to have this lecture with Achille, and you have it. So we decided to work with you. The very vexing and I think alluring question of both the planetary and the question of habitability. At WISER, we talk about all kinds of things, and we're talking more and more about climate change. The one thing I'd want to say from my point of view is that it's been a hard sell to get social scientists generally to start layering in climate change into their debates. And I think there's still a tendency to think that we ought to think about climate change in relation to the environmental humanities. But in fact, at this point, and I know you'll agree, it really seems essential that in discussions around political theory, economic theory, critical theory, we need to be layering it in very strongly. We need to be thinking with it. So this is a fantastic opportunity to collaborate with you. And I'm very glad that Achille from WISER has agreed to do this opening lecture. Also, we live in silos in Wits, so wonderful to collaborate. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you so much. Let me then pass it on to Lara.
Thank you, Ron. And together here with my co-PI, Sally Archibald, we're from the Future Ecosystems for Africa program, which is being funded by Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation. And we also had Professor Mbembe on a list of speakers. So it's really fantastic to be able to co-host together with WISER and with the Pro VC's office. And I guess coming from the natural science perspective, it is more about these collaborations because we know a lot about the science. And as part of this program, we're really trying to bring a much more African voice to the science and the work that's done on our ecosystems on the continent, because it tends to be biased by sort of global north perspectives. But with that, to also realize that when we're thinking about the sorts of trajectories, the sustainable futures that we're trying to build, the development pathways that we really need to engage with as natural scientists, we can't do it without the humanities and the social scientists. And I think that this is the perfect opportunity to start really engaging in those important existential debates around our politics, around what decoloniality means in the African context, and how we can bring that into the work that we do as researchers, as scientists working on sustainability. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's an honor to be able to co-host with you.
So for the purposes of launching this lecture series, there were a few things that we had wanted in the speaker. The first is that we kind of really wanted someone who was an African scholar, who was thinking kind of really, really deeply about these issues. We thought that it would be appropriate that we should start a lecture series of the sort. Not by inviting someone from another university, but really to start with kind of someone who's a leading scholar internationally, but who is based in the South, and who is based at our university. And I was extremely thrilled when Prof. Mbembe agreed to do this lecture. Thank you so much for that, Achille. So for those of you who don't know Achille Mbembe, he has a PhD from the Sorbonne. He has spent time and had appointments kind of at all of the kind of leading universities of the world, kind of including Penn. He's been at he's been at Harvard. He's been at Yale. He was the kind of head of the Social Science Council for Africa. But I think what he's best known for is that he's a professor at Wits University. So with that, let me ask Achille to come to the podium to deliver his lecture today.
I'm very, very happy that, with Imran's introduction, it was short and it went to the matter that I'm from Wits University. I would like to thank him for this occasion, as well as Sarah and Lara. For the sake of clarity, I would like to say a few things about the title of the lecture, Notes on Planetary Habitability. I would like to say something particularly about the notion of habitability. I think it's important to start from there. I'll just tell you a short story. A few years ago, with a number of friends, we were going to Sun City. And along the way, we kept seeing these huge posters with the words, "Jesus is the answer." At some point, one of our colleagues said, "Okay, sure, Jesus is the answer, but what is the question?" So I want to say something about the concept of habitability as a way of, if you want, making it clear what for me is the question. The concept of habitability derives from the fact that some conditions are favorable to life and others are not. It derives from that basic premise. In other words, if life exists somewhere, it means that certain conditions are met which are favorable to its existence and evolution. The question thus is, what are these conditions? How do they come to be? How can they be harnessed, maintained, and reproduced in such a way as to ensure the sustainability and durability of all life forms, not just human forms? So referring to the notion of habitability in that sense. And for me, as Imran suggested a moment ago, what is really at stake is the very possibility of life durability on Earth as we enter this new epoch I will be talking about in a moment. Lara called it an existential question, and it is an existential question for sure. So habitability is, if you want, about the complex relationship between life and environments and milieus and resources and habitats. It is about the equilibrium between our requirements and what Earth can provide. It's about that relationship and that equilibrium. And if such a equilibrium is ruptured, then limits are put to life. Then the environment is no longer in a position to harbor life. Then life is squeezed or is no longer evenly distributed. So that's the first question, the question of the squeezing of life, of its uneven distribution on Earth. These are not just technical questions. These are political questions. They are questions of justice, or even more importantly, of planetary justice, since we are talking not about one specific country, one specific continent, we are talking about the planet at large. Now, as it happens, one of the many things we humans have long taken for granted is the grounded reality of our existence on Earth. we live on Earth and nowhere else. I mean, that's the second truism I would like to introduce to our conversation tonight. We don't live on Mars. We don't live on the moon. We live on Earth. We live on Earth for all kinds of reasons, chief among which is the fact that of all the planets, this is the only one, at least so far, where complex forms of life are possible. We take this for granted. I suggest that we stop taking it for granted and that we interrogate what looks like a truism or evidence. The other thing is that the entity we call the Earth has, in fact, existed long before human beings began populating it. It was there before us. For a long time, it existed independently of human beings. It might well be that it might survive us, but that's another matter. With the advent of modernity, Imran said 200 years, the Earth began to primarily appear to us within a very narrow horizon. It wasn't always like that. When we look, for instance, at African cosmologies never took the Earth or imagined it from within the very narrow expanses we know of today. But anyway, with the advent of modernity, we began to, the Earth began to appear to us within a very narrow horizon, the narrow horizon of useful things, of what Heidegger called the world of equipment, that is a kind of world that is entirely at our service, a mass of matter we imagined was lacking form, and it was our duty to give it form, to form it if you want, and to form it fundamentally through technology. And this is how, of late, we have inhabited the Earth. Imran summarized it very well, referring, for instance, to the quasi-exhaustion of all the resources that have been harnessed in order to inhabit it in the way in which we are. Suggesting, therefore, that we might be at the end of a cycle which, in relation to the Earth's own duration, will have been rather short. 200 years in relation to the very age of the Earth, it's a very, very small amount of time. This having been said, we finally seem to be coming to the realization that absent a significant adjustment to how we conduct our lives, parts of the Earth will likely become inhospitable to life in the near future. Indeed, many are wondering how we should inhabit anew and share as equitably as possible a planet whose life support system has been so severely damaged by human activities, and that is in dire need of repair. So I'm introducing into our discussion these questions of not only how to inhabit the Earth anew, but also questions of sharing the Earth, as opposed to just partitioning it, questions of repairing it, sharing it and repairing it as a precondition for its durability and for our own durability. So in view of the deep state of fragmentation the planet finds itself in, many are now asking how we should put back together its different parts, how we should reassemble it, reconstitute it as an integrated system in which humans and non-humans, physical, chemical, biological components, oceans, atmosphere, land surface, all are, if you want, interlinked in a grand gesture of biosymbiosis and mutuality. These are the new questions. In any case, in some of the disciplines some of us traffic, these are the new questions that are at the heart of the kind of new planet-centered thinking the humanities and parts of the social sciences are involved in of late. So these questions of habitability, of biosymbiosis, of durability, these questions of the interlacing of human history and the Earth's history, these questions are far from abstract concerns. Indeed, if we were to believe the most recent studies of the trajectories of the Earth system, we may well be fast approaching a threshold behind which the Earth might be irreversibly turned into a hothouse. In fact, the ongoing long-term planetary environmental changes have only further dramatized these issues, and there is little doubt that they will be at the center of any debate on the future of life in this century. If there is one question we will be grappling with for this century in every single discipline, it is the question of life futures. Another way of referring, therefore, to what you call the ecological crisis, the climate crisis, what I have called question of planetary habitability. Let me now, since I mentioned life futures, let me now spend a little bit of time on this question, which, by the way, let me repeat, is at the center of the new planet-centered debates, which are happening effectively at the interface of the humanities and various disciplines in the social sciences, as well as natural sciences, health sciences, environmental sciences, technology studies, and so forth and so on. So there's a new field that is emerging around which those who used to work, as Sarah put it, in silos are now coming together in order to put their minds together and debate on this issue. Let me therefore say a few things on this matter of life futures. You know, for a very long time, we, the human race, have been concerned with how life emerges, with questions of its spatial distribution, the conditions of its evolution, its resilience, and so forth and so on. Now, whether life emerged in warm or cold little ponds or in hot hydrothermal vents might no longer matter. That question has been somewhat resolved. Of course, there might remain a number of issues, but overall, this has been resolved. there is nowadays near agreement that life as such is built into, if you want, the chemistry of the universe itself. It is not simply an energy or a set of properties. It is, in and of itself, an activity. And life is an activity. There's also near agreement on the fact that life did not passively adapt to pre-existing environments. It modified them. It modified itself so much that environments changed life forms, just as life forms changed the environment. There is also near agreement that life has the ability to replicate itself while reducing entropy at the expense of external sources. In other words, it is to a large extent self-sustaining. It is also agreed that the most abundant life forms that are present on Earth, let's say the most abundant life form is microbial life. And that, in fact, carbon-based life forms only represent a small percentage of the total life of our planet. Now, of course, as we know, life requires the presence of liquid water, among other things. Furthermore, its sustainability, for its sustainability, it must be at a range of distance from a star, in this case the sun, a distance within which radiation from the sun can maintain water in liquid form, thus protecting it from either evaporation or freezing. All of this is nowadays largely taken for granted. The fact is that major shifts are underway, and I would like to say a thing or two about some of these shifts, because they bear precisely upon the broader issue of planetary habitability. And such shifts are partly the result of findings, not really in our fields, in the humanities or the social sciences, but in fields of astrobiology, planetary science, physical cosmology. Part of what is going on is that some of the key questions, some of them purely metaphysical, what is life? What are our origins? What is the ultimate meaning of the universe? Some of those old questions that were dealt with by the humanities, moral philosophy, literature, theology, are now, in fact, the domain of scientists, hard scientists. This is a shift that has been happening at least since the beginning of the 80s, that the humanities have abandoned some of the key issues that were part of their kingdom, and most of them are now being dealt with by hardcore scientists who are asking questions basically about the meaning of the cosmos and of the universe. In addition, of course, to let's say coming up with a number of responses to all the questions we have have been entertaining. So crucial in this regard has been, for instance, the discovery of biological organisms in the world's driest deserts, as well as in subglacial lakes and in hot springs, that is in places objectively recognized not only as unfit for human habitation, but as fundamentally incapable of sustaining life as such. This is a very important discovery. But just as decisive has been the discovery, for instance, of airborne microbes that have been captured in the stratospheres, as well as that of microscopic animals capable of suspended animation. All these findings and many others have led, and that's the point I want to make, to a reassessment of the received notion of habitable environment, to the received notion of what the requisites for life actually are, or even of what it means to be alive. Old philosophical questions now dealt with by non-philosophers. But even more important, these discoveries are forcing us to look for novel ways of envisaging what life in the extremes, which is likely to become our new planetary condition, might actually look like. And this is really an important dimension of the ongoing discussions on planetary habitability. So I wanted to share with you that series of observations. Let me now move to another series of observations which have to do with the fact that we live on Earth at a very specific moment, which itself is in need of, if you want, being of decipherment. It's a moment when the complex networks of relations that sustain life on this planet, that network, Imran said it loudly, is in deep crisis. It is in crisis as a consequence of a very specific event, which has to do with our entry into a new climatic regime. Now, by a new climatic regime, we should understand a number of things. But most importantly, we should understand a boundary, a threshold. Imran said we are on the verge of, a precipice. Maybe that boundary I'm talking about, that threshold, is indeed a precipice. But in any case, it is a boundary, it is a threshold. What kind of boundary? First of all, it is a geological, chronological boundary. Indeed, it reflects fundamental changes in the Earth system as such. Fundamental changes in our capacity to hold the Earth on our shoulders, and reciprocally in the Earth's capacity to hold us on its shoulders. I'm speaking in those terms because it might be time now to indeed imagine the Earth as having a body, the body of the Earth. It is also a boundary that is fast taking the features of a temporal collision. What we are witnessing is a massive temporal collision. Probably of a kind we had never witnessed before. Temporal collision in the sense that we are experiencing a clash of temporalities. Geological time, the deep time of these processes that fashioned our terrestrial home, then historical and experiential time, all these times now fold in on one another. We'll say, okay, of course, they were always somewhat folding in on one another. Maybe, but not at this pace. Not in the kind of accelerated pace we have been witnessing over the last 2 centuries. Thirdly, collision of times. Time is no longer redistributed along human and non-human scales. Human and Earth history are not only indivisible, inseparable, they now form a strange concatenation. That's part of what is going on. And as a number of thinkers have made it clear, it's no longer possible nowadays to, for historians, for instance, to, let's say, write social history on the one hand and natural history on the other, because the two are entangled now at such a rhythm and such a pace as to make those separations pretty tenuous. Finally, it is a boundary that is increasingly somatic. Somatic in the sense that our bodies, as well as the body of the earth itself, are now intermingled in a way we hardly ever thought about before, which has tremendous consequences, for instance, in terms of the health of the soils, in terms of the health of animals, the health of species in general, and the health of life forms as a matter of fact. What I mean by that is that our bodies increasingly bear the traces of these multiple temporal clashes. They have become, for instance, repositories of different kinds of risks. Of course, we are still in one of them, in COVID. COVID is precisely about this, when we think about it. And as a result of the changing nature of the ecosystems to which we belong, the air we breathe, the water we drink, our organisms are becoming something else. So, in this new regime of distribution of, for instance, chemical nutrient, polluting matter, not only is life being squeezed, but the old boundaries between what is inside and what is outside, those old boundaries are being displaced. And the continuity and, in fact, inextricability between organisms and their environments are quickly leading to the unfolding of, I would argue, an entirely new biology of this world, as well as to new ways of partitioning the earth itself. And this is a major event with capital E, which calls for renewed intellectual investments, new research, precisely into this epoch that is pretty singular. So nowadays, the core question is or must therefore be framed in terms of how complex forms of life can still be reproduced, can be sustained, made durable, preserved, and universally shared, as I argued right from the beginning. Indeed, human life is increasingly seen within the prism of other forms of life, the life of all living beings and things, and the conditions under which it ends. So what I'm saying is that if not so long ago, we were preoccupied with the question of how life emerges, now more and more, the issue is how does it end? Under what conditions does it end? That's the shift that has been occurring at a time when, let's say, the life of human organisms and the life of all living beings are inseparable. We recognize that inseparability, that inextricability, and therefore it's something we have to attend to. I mentioned bodies. I didn't mention the souls. The soul being one element, like the skin of the earth. As we all know, of course, soils have been shifted. Microclimates have been altered. We keep altering them. Nickel, zinc, silver displaced for the cloud. Nutrient density in the crops we breed is diminishing as agri-food corporations stake their empire on profit maximization, drawing mineral and organic value straight from the skin of the earth into closed proprietary chains and loops. So the disruption of the nutrient cycling process, for instance, if we follow the work done by specialists, is leading, as we know, to severe loss, narrowing of genetic pool of cultivars, and the multiple beings that compose the planet and the planet itself, it becomes clear and clear, share the same bodily arrhythmia, if you want. And this, I think, is a very important element. We can no longer do as if it didn't exist. So the point is that we have entered a new epoch. A new epoch in the Earth's geological history. A new epoch, as Dipesh Chakrabarty has put it, which is characterized to some extent by the fact that we humans have become the primary agents of change on a planetary scale. A great force of nature, a gigantic force, in fact, a force so gigantic that it competes now with other telluric forces. And in the process, it's transforming the Earth with a magnitude and speed unparalleled in the past. So this new climatic regime has pushed our planet into a critical zone. The question of whether we can find new ways of living on a damaged planet, or whether we can build and sustain a new and timely relation with the world and with the earth, has thus become key, I would argue, to any deliberation on the future of species and other species on Earth. Now, let me end with a few considerations on technology, because as you well imagine, the interface between biological life and technology is exponentially expanding. In fact, the last century has seen a steep uptick in the use of biotechnical instruments of all kinds. Technologies, for instance, that affect the minds and bodies of humans, as well as the inner composition of plants, bacteria, animals, hormonal disruptors and enhancers, immunizers, plant and insect modifiers, and the like, have woven the endocrine, the nervous, the immune, and the neurological systems of biological organisms, all of that into the fabric of the technosphere. So when we talk about the Earth today, we have to factor in the technosphere. So it seems to me then that biotechnical infrastructures are in fact increasingly reorganizing the boundaries of biochemical life on Earth. And we have to take this into consideration. Now, as the new century unfolds, we are, in fact, increasingly surrounded by multiple and expanding, let me just call them wave fronts of calculation. More and more, these wave fronts incorporate life, death, and matter into systems of abstraction and mechanic reasoning. In the process, they generate new automated couplings between matter and machines, waste and human beings. And if yesterday, the modern rational subject's raison de vivre was to fight myth, superstitions, obscurantism, and if the work of reason, let's say the work of reason nowadays is to allow for different modes of, I think, of seeing and measuring to appear. It is to, if you want, help humans to properly identify the threshold that distinguishes between the calculable and the incalculable, the quantifiable and the unquantifiable, the computable and the uncomputable. It seems to me that that is where we are, at a point where we have, in the face of the expansion of these wavefronts of calculation, we have to go back to the point where we learn how to distinguish between that which is calculable and that which is incalculable, that which is quantifiable and that which is unquantifiable. If we do not hold that line, then I have no doubt that we will jump over the precipice with all the unforeseen consequences this might entail. But as I said early on, the Earth was there before we began populating it. It might well be that it might survive us if by mistake or by design, we end up trying to destroy it ad infinitum. Those were some brief considerations on the question of planetary habitability. The purpose was not to propose any policy solution. I'm sure that that will come in the follow-up to this lecture. I thank you very much for your attention.
So I thought that was a kind of pretty amazing journey through kind of questions about where we sort of come from, and where we might end up, and kind of some of the kind of key factors driving that journey. Let me kind of ask you to kind of join me in again, kind of congratulating Prof. Mbembe for that lecture. So we've got some time for your thoughts, for your questions, and some time for us to engage around these ideas. So let me then kind of open it up to the floor. I'm going to take rounds between those who are kind of inside the room and those who are online. So let's start inside the room. I'm going to take 2 questions, Laura and then Keith.
Thank you so much for that truly extraordinary lecture. I've got all sorts of comments going around, including sort of geological time and the habitability of the Holocene, and sort of whether we're a coevolution of extremophiles. I'm sort of heading into the technosphere. But the point that you made that really struck me was on organisms becoming something else. And for me, I was wondering whether we've actually always been entangled, but sort of we've inherited this post-Enlightenment modernist Descartesian view of dichotomies that have sort of tried to separate the messiness, and whether we actually need to turn to alternative cosmologies. So I've been doing quite a lot of work in Latin America on the concept of Mother Earth, etc. And whether if we continue to try and address the crisis with the same tools that created it in the first place, whether this is an exercise in futility and how we can potentially move beyond that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to Keith.
Yeah, thank you so much, Achille. The problem is the lights won't just turn off. You know, it's going to be a really horrible, long process of decline. And I wonder, it does seem like there's the new problem. So to take the new Chilean constitution, which extends rights to microorganisms for the first time. It sounds great, and it's driven by scientists who've been driving it. But what it would mean is that Chile, which produces essentially the metals we need in order to manage climate change in any meaningful way, copper and lithium, they're going to essentially, there will be no, it doesn't look like there'll be any new investment in mining those products. So it does, I'm not sure whether we're introducing a new set of human models into the way we think about the physical world, and whether that's making it actually even more impossible than the kind of very difficult climatological and economic situation we find ourselves in.
Great, Keith. Thank you. So I'm going to throw in a kind of question from someone who's online, Achille, and then perhaps you could deal with those 3. The kind of questions asking if you can comment on the idea of the rights of nature, and the kind of types of things that we're seeing in countries such as Ecuador and countries such as New Zealand, where natural elements are being kind of granted rights that we traditionally think of as human rights. So if you could sort of tackle that one as well. So let me pass it on to you for some responses on those 3 questions, and then we can then take another round.
First of all, Lara, thanks for your questions. Yes. I think the critique has been done. Been done. It never ends, so we have to keep making it. But we are now, or some of us are fully aware of the limits of certain forms of reason that have become somewhat hegemonic or dominant, in particular over the last two, 3 centuries. As you see, I hesitate to call it Western reason because such a term does not mean much, in fact, because what some of us take for so-called Western reason is itself extremely complex. It's not one thing. It's many different strands which contradict each other, and in fact, if anything, so-called Western reason has this peculiarity that it has built in itself the resources and the categories to critique itself, probably much more efficiently and much more powerfully than some external forms of critique. But that's a debate. I mean, you know what it is. So it's not a matter of opposing so-called Western reason to non-Western reasons. It's a matter of probably learning to draw from the multiplicity of the archives of the world. For me, it's more that than anything else. Because when I say archives, of course, I also refer to what you call cosmologies. Because the kinds of originary dichotomies, most of which are at the heart of certain modes of reasoning, those dichotomies are not universal at all. They have never been universal. When I have been paying a lot of attention of late to so-called African pre-colonial systems of thought. Systems of thought developed, for instance, among the Dogon in Mali, in the Congo region, among the people of the forests, among the Yoruba. There are a number of instances, systematic modes of thinking, which are not at all premised on the model of the partition of the world into different segments opposed to each other. They emerge out of models of practice, which unfortunately, in the long history of the encounter with international forces, have been reduced to animism. Animism referring to presumably an inferior mode of being and of relating to questions of causality, intentionality, and so forth and so on. But part of what is going on is that we are witnessing nowadays we are reading animism in an entirely new way, in a context in which the distinction between the subject and the object is collapsing, in a context in which there is no subject today that is not, how do you say it in English? There's no subject that is an object. The two are becoming, in the new technological age we live in, completely enmeshed. For instance, there are in some of those cosmologies an entirely different mode of relating to so-called nature, a way of understanding fully that agency, in fact, is by definition always redistributed. And that if you really want to be an efficient subject, you have to borrow, buy, or whatever from other actors in the field. I mean, nothing, if you read, for instance, now borrow from literature, the work of someone like Amos Tutuola. Amos Tutuola is really one of those who showed to a large extent how it is that we can imagine the world in a way that is not at all what we have inherited. So yes, there are those cosmologies. We need to rediscover them and harness the resources, deep resources they have, if we want to learn how to inhabit the world anew. If we want to learn, once again, how to share agency, how to care, and how to repair as preconditions for our own durability and the durability of the planet, because that is what it is all about. It's all about that. We won't be able to do it by basically relying on one cosmology at all. I could have mentioned all that is coming from the Amazonian metaphysics, which have been studied. It's not as if these things had not been studied. They are there. We need to use them. So that would be, if you want, the answer. And by doing so, it's not as if we are going back to the past. It has nothing to do with some nostalgia for a past that used to be romantic. It has to do with the capacity to project ourselves into a future which, for it to be open to all, requires a different recognition of our entanglement with all species, with all living beings and all living things. That's the shift. Now, Keith's question, it is a very difficult one, because in doing so, in granting recognition to non-humans, and by non-humans here one means not only, mountains and rivers, as they have done in Ecuador or other entities, but recognition to all living beings and things, the totality of the species of the Earth's inhabitants. And when I use the term inhabitants purposefully, because an inhabitant is not necessarily a citizen. The term citizen has narrowed down forms of belonging by inscribing them within the logic of the nation state in particular, which, as we know, is discriminatory by definition, if not, is not a nation state. I'm using the term inhabitants precisely to augment our imagination of forms of belonging. Just like, in the Freedom Charter here, there's an article in the Freedom Charter I have always been amazed at. South Africa belongs to all who live in it. You can do exactly the same thing with the earth. The earth belongs to all who live in it. Not just human beings, all its inhabitants. Technology, the technosphere being part of all of that. So it forces us to reimagine what the earthly community could possibly be in a kind of utopian forward thinking. How is it that we can begin to imagine some entity that would be a community, the earthly community, as the community, kind of community that is so ecumenical that it makes space for every single living being and thing. So in that sense, of course, the attempts in Ecuador, in Chile, and other parts of the world could make perfect sense. But of course, as Keith is suggesting, he didn't say this, these attempts at new forms of recognition and new forms of granting rights quickly hit a number of obstacles. First of all, the obstacle of who speaks on behalf of whom. Okay, let's grant rights to forests in the Congo. Do forests speak? Who stands for them in what type of parliament, for instance? There are very concrete issues like that, which we have to fine-tune them, refine them, because, of course, if all of this is written within the perspective of democracy of the living, there's no democracy without some form or the other of representation. How will we organize how will we hear their voice? How will they deploy their voice in the big exercise, the articulation of the general will? So there are those questions, political. There are also economic questions, as Keith was intimating, for which I have no responses. But all I know is that this work is being done, and that is being done in relation to a whole revision of forms of property, forms of questions of property, critique of property, a renewed critique of property that is unfolding not only in industrialized countries, but also, of course, that draws on old forms of appropriation that were alive in non-Western spaces. I think it's the same thing, same question was raised by the colleague who spoke online. It's an open question. It is an open question, and we won't be able to avoid it. We'll have to sort it out if indeed the purpose is to move towards an entirely new planetary dispensation that is devoted to protecting life rather than destroying the living, as we have seen over the last few centuries.
You stay there, Achille. I think I can chair from here. Can I just check with our colleague from IT? Can we take questions from those online? Meaning, can they actually speak? Yes, we can do that. So I'm going to pick a few colleagues online who have kind of raised their hands. and I'm going to ask them to just unmute themselves and kind of share and share. I'm going to ask those who are online to kind of unmute themselves when I kind of call their names, and we can take questions from them. So I'm going to start with Francois Engelbrecht. Francois, are you able to speak?
Thank you, Imran. Yes, thank you very much. The audio just got enabled here on my side. Thank you very much, Professor Mbembe, for this very provocative talk. And I would like to ask a question about the inequalities that exist in terms of future habitability of the planet. I'm thinking, for example, of the fact that in the global north, except now, of course, for the significant problem of sea level rise, the cool land masses of the global north may, in some regions, in fact, benefit from warming. When cool regions, such as most of the global north land masses, become warmer and wetter, there's much that you can do in terms of adapting to such a change. But if we look at the global south, at the subtropical land masses, these are regions that are already warm and dry. Now they are becoming much warmer and likely also drier. And it is in these parts of the world where we expect the first major regional tipping points to be reached in terms of habitability. In the sense that, for example, the cattle industry in a country like Botswana may become completely unviable, even as soon as mid-century. And the maize crop may collapse entirely. The estimate is that that may happen at somewhere between 2.5 and 3 degrees Celsius of global warming. So when dry and warm regions, such as those in the global south, become warmer and much drier, the options for adaptation are much more limited than in the global north. I'll be very keen to hear your thoughts on this.
Was it clear enough, Achille? Maybe if folk didn't hear the question, Francois' question was kind of essentially about the kind of inequalities of kind of the kind of inequalities of habitability, and he's pointing out that the cool land masses in the north will stay habitable for much longer than those in the south. Kind of second kind of question, I'm going to go online to a colleague whose name's Janet Munakamwe, I'm sorry. Can you proceed to ask your question, Janet?
Yes, good evening, colleagues, and many thanks to Prof. Mbembe for such a very profound presentation. Mine is just an elementary course. I appreciate that you already made a disclaimer that this presentation, of course, is not primarily targeting at policy. But for me, I guess, in a way, the issues around climate change are very topical and very relevant today. I'm actually busy working on some consultations with civil societies and communities on the issue of the proposed new social compact for South Africa, and climate change issues have come out prominently. So for me, I really would have wanted to hear perhaps your thoughts around key policy proposals, or one, if I could even have one or two from the work that you've been doing that we could also incorporate as part of our broad submissions. Because actually, I think it would be great to really have some scientifically evidence-backed kind of proposals in addition to the input from grassroots. I hope it's something that I didn't ask for too much, but I guess that would be very important to get to hear from leading academics in this area on this matter. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that, Janet. I'm going to take one more question online. Pipeshwas, are you, if you're online, can you ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Imran. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Achille. It was an excellent talk. But my main takeaway from it was the whole question of, why is the end of human and non-human life underway? And in popular discourse, this question is being answered in different ways. There's a lot of talk about collective suicide. There's a lot of talk about, well, we can imagine the end of the world, but we cannot imagine the end of capitalism. But you alluded to the underlying sort of material processes here. And as a social scientist, for me, I'm looking for causality. You alluded to the extractivist logic of capitalism. And in my view, as one dimension of capitalist accumulation through ecocide, the mass scale destruction of human and non-human life. And many of the other things you spoke about, for me, are also related to the same logic, whether it's appropriating genetic life, where does the climate regime shift you spoke about, etc. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on the place of capitalism in all of this. Thanks.
Great, Achille, over to you, and then with your permission, I'm going to kind of perform a temporal collision and extend our time a little bit past 6:30 by taking one more round. But let me pass it to you now.
Okay, these are very interesting questions. Let me just maybe repeat something I said early on, which is that the Earth, and I keep coming back to that category for all kinds of reasons, the Earth is being redefined in a way that binds all species together, humans, technology, animals, fungi, plants, viruses, bacteria, are the same life in, if you want, in disparate bodies. That's the starting point of, let's say, the type of reflection I'm trying to put forward. And that's really important to keep coming back to that, that the inseparability nowadays of the various forms of life. One cannot disappear without consequences on the others. That is an important element. Now, Francois, yes, Francois, you're absolutely right. And of course, we are all aware of questions of not only climate justice, but questions having to do with what do you call inequalities of habitability. And here, they are not, as we know too, simply repartitioning the world between the cooler parts of the world and the warmer ones. Of course, that's part of the calculus, but it's not the only one, if only because, including in the north itself, similar lines of differentiation are at work. They are at work in places such as the US, for instance, where but not just the US, where race is a key element of the old and new forms of stratification of exposure to all kinds of risks, some of which are transmitted genetically, some of which are reproduced through generations. We know all the work that's being done in epigenetics, for instance, where people live, how the kinds of diseases they are exposed to, and how such diseases are transmitted to the coming generations. So it's a map of all of these modalities of inequality is necessary. Let's say is something we probably have to keep drawing and redrawing. The as far as the continent itself is concerned, you see, I mean, if we want to think a bit broadly, the question of the experience of unlivable lives, it's not new. The experience of living in the extremes. There is a whole archive of such experiences in the history of the continent. And since this is going to become our new condition, not only in Africa, but in other parts of the world, it might make sense, especially for historians and other thinkers, to look a bit more closely into those experiences of living over a very long period of time under conditions of objective unlivability. How is it that people do when they confront such extremes? What kinds of extremes? What resources do they harness to survive? And at what point is it that those experiences can tell us something about how we construct, I think Imran said, adaptation or resilience in the midst of tipping points. I really believe that there's some serious research to be done at that level, if only to see how people struggle against structures of inequality in such conditions, most of which have a climatic dimension, but they also have political and cultural dimensions, and of course, economic dimensions. I say this with the Sahel in mind. I could have mentioned, what's going on in the Horn of Africa, these dry regions where we have had deep experiences of rupture, of quasi-metabolic rupture. Metabolic in the sense that the very conditions of life have been shaken and threatened to a point where many people have been forced to move somewhere else. And yet others have remained in those spaces and have over time been able to repair them and make them once again livable. So we need to know more about those historical experiences. We don't know much about them. What happened in the Sahel, for instance, during the famines of the 70s, the early 70s? What happened there? What is going on in the Horn of Africa? And in that sense, it seems to be the continent, because it has faced so much, it might in fact be an extremely interesting laboratory for the forms of life that we need if we are to address properly what's going on. Now, part of what happened in the Sahel in terms of inequalities, Francois, and I think Vishwas, part of what happened had to do, for instance, with the entire spatial reorganization that took place in that part of the continent. I mentioned space because space here is absolutely critical for addressing the issue of climate change, whatever you want to call it, planetary habitability. The question of not only how do we repair space at the Earth, but how do we share it? We share it by making sure, among all the possible additional rights one can think about, making sure that the right of circulation, I don't have any other word for this, is guaranteed to all. The right to move, the question of mobility, which in fact is becoming absolutely crucial in the securing of the means of existence, the daily means of existence, those means without which life itself is at stake. So it seems to me that deep reflection on these politics of mobility, of that is absolutely a key element in mitigating the inequalities of habitability. That is a key element. And in fact, is the whole spatial geography of the continent that needs to be reorganized. It needs to be reorganized because, let me say this, the nation state form is a total impediment to to making the planet, the Earth, habitable in the coming future. It will be a huge impediment. We need to reorganize the whole African space, spatial organization. How? Maybe Imran will organize another lecture for that. But it seems to me that the spatial redistribution is a key element for mitigating the inequalities that will ensue from the acceleration of climate change and the ecological consequences of all of this. And here, it's not as if we go into that issue without resources. The history of the continent itself is a huge repository for us to imagine forms of mobility that existed prior to colonialism, for instance, and ongoing forms of mobility that are actually happening. I'm driving a research project called Regions 2050, which pays clear attention at a very basic level to those forms of mobility and their connection to the securing of means of existence. And one can see how clearly a lot will be played out in terms of incapacitating people to move, but to move in a certain manner and to repeople the continent around networks of life around, for instance, the reshaping of our economies along the lines of water, along the lines of trees, along the lines of the sun, of the wind, of our natural capital, which would be totally different from Vishwash, the kind of extractive economies you have in mind, but in which indeed we rethink the economy in relation to space in an entirely different manner, as a way of, let's say, securing a modicum of climate justice. Now, Janet, frankly, Janet, I didn't think about policy, but you see, because I believe that there is a prior work that needs to be done. I was mentioning the Sahel, for instance, which is one region of the continent where, if we are to believe the predictions of the scientists, terrible things will happen pretty soon. And it's not as if these are deserted spaces, not at all. These are spaces that are inhabited by a combination of agriculturists, for instance, people who work on the land, and so-called nomadic people who are very rich with cattle. And for instance, there was a Muslim holiday recently. There's one Muslim holiday once a year in West Africa, when you see a migration of sheep and the mouton from Mali to Senegal, to Burkina Faso, to Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast. Millions of such animals. They rely fundamentally on nomadism, which means a deep knowledge of space, a deep knowledge of where water is located, because the beasts have to drink, they have to eat, they have to move, they have to cross borders, official borders. All of that has to be negotiated. Deep knowledge is involved in all of this. What is it? What does it consist of if it's not written? So it seems to me there are a number of things like that which will rely on our capacity to produce new knowledges about what people have always been doing, since they have been here for a very, very long time. They have been there, it means they have built, created mechanisms to at least, let's say, mitigate the effects of potential catastrophes. What is that knowledge? What does it consist of? How can we document it and disseminate it? Is part of, let's say, the kinds of policy, at least in my field, which could be immediately thought about. I will leave to Imran the more hardcore stuff about fiscality and the rest. But I think, can we then end here?
Yes, yeah, I had wanted to take one more round, but I think it would be unfair on
to keep going on.
No. I think it would be unfair on you and kind of unfair on everyone else for us to take one more round. So let me end the evening here. I trust that those who had their hands up will understand. I just want to thank I just want to thank kind of everyone who was involved in making it possible for us to have the lecture. If I'm going to go through it, it's going to take time, and I'm also going to not remember everyone. So you all know who you are. Thank you so much. But I think I should kind of specifically say a great thank you to Achille for the talk and for the profound thoughts that you shared with us today. Thank you so much, Achille. I also just wanted to share with kind of everyone that we piling the lectures in thick and fast. So we have another lecture on the 11th of August at 9 a.m. By Professor Pim Martens from Maastricht University, and he'll kind of address us on the kind of issue of planetary health, kind of really talking about our relationship with the with the environment and with the animals that are part of life on this planet. So with that, let me close the event. There's some snacks and drinks. Please kind of join us for that, and we can continue the conversation there. For those who joined us online, thank you so much, and you can have a drink with us in extension. Thank you, everyone.